Welcome everybody to our 2:30 scheduled talk today. We'll be talking with Sydney Brazeau, who will be speaking on protecting the elderly from cybercrime, a community edition approach. Thank you, and Sydney, I'll give it to you.
Thank you so much. Let's start the slideshow here. And so today's talk will be on protecting the elderly from cybercrime, a community education approach. Let's start off with who I am. I was born and raised in Alaska, and I now live in Maryland. I'm a golden retriever mom. I have 2 beautiful golden retrievers. I received my bachelor's of emergency management in Homeland Security and Emergency Management with a concentration in cybersecurity management from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I recently received my master's degree in cybersecurity studies. And on Twitter, you can find me at Sydney Brazeau. So I did this project as part of my capstone project, and I looked at the cybercrime victimization of the elderly, and then I looked at the communication styles and preferences of the elderly, and I took both all of that information and I developed a curriculum packet to address the cybercrime victimization of the elderly using their preferred communication styles and preferences. I also looked at why the elderly use computers, and they mostly use it to connect with family and friends and to obtain banking information and health information. The analysis part of my project looked at the generational barriers to communication, the benefits that the elderly gain from having technology in their lives, such as being able to connect with family and friends and obtain that health and banking information. And I looked at these psychological factors that increase cybercrime victimization of the elderly. I looked at is being more agreeable or more, like being more I don't want to say gullible, but the single most indicative factor of cybercrime victimization of the elderly was mental decline. So that was very important. I also looked at the risky behaviors that the elderly. Sorry, kitty cat, you have to go down. The risky behaviors that the elderly do online, such as putting their personal information out there. Like they would go onto genealogy websites and put out a bunch of personal information from their for their family, and that also puts their families at risk. And sometimes the elderly wouldn't understand that having personal information outside of their bank account number or their social security number could be used for exploitation. And then I also looked at how seniors can mitigate cybersecurity issues by themselves. So if we give them tools, are they able to apply these tools? And how can we give seniors more independence through giving them the necessary tools? And I also looked at what barriers senior citizens have in asking for help with cybersecurity issues. Looking at cybercrime victimization, in 2019, adults over the age of 60 lost over $8 million to internet crimes. That accounts for about a third of the total loss from internet crimes reported to the Internet Crimes Complaint Center of the FBI. Senior citizens are 5 times more likely to lose money to tech support scams than other age groups. And on average, adults over the age of 60 lost an average of $600. The most common fraud types, according to ones reported to U.S. agencies, are phishing, spoofing, tech support scams. That's a very increasing field, is the tech support scams, lottery scams, romance fraud, government imposters, and credit card fraud. Let's look at the fraud victimization cycle in senior citizens. So it starts off. a senior citizen is victimized online. Say they they were on a romance website and somebody with a really cute profile picture was like, I would love to visit you. I need some money to help out a family member before I can come and visit you. And then they'll just keep asking for money and asking for money, and that's a classic romance fraud. And that leads them to, once they realize that they've been victimized, they feel shame from being victimized. And then they also fear a loss of independence, because if they tell a family member or about that, or a friend about this, then they could possibly, like, the family member might be like, well, maybe you shouldn't go online anymore because you're obviously vulnerable to this, and maybe we should put you in a home because you're communicating with people and you're vulnerable to this, and so maybe you need more supervision. And so the senior citizens fear that loss of independence, and then they withdraw from family and friends because they don't want to talk about the issue, which then leads to depression and loneliness, which then leads to fraud revictimization. And so the cycle just perpetrates itself and just keeps going and going. And so through having community education and resources, we can prevent the fraud victimization, address some of the shame from being victimized, and then since they have the tools to prevent it, and they have the resources of where to talk to and where to go if they are victimized, that can help prevent the withdrawal from family and friends. And then also having mental health resources available to senior citizens prevents the loneliness and depression that can lead to fraud revictimization. Let's look at the aging brain. Previously, I mentioned that cognitive decline is the single largest factor of senior citizen fraud victimization. This is because of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC. It's the first part of the brain to decline with age-related decline. It is responsible for your decision-making, filtering good versus bad information, and making sure that you stay safe. VMPFC decline is associated with poor financial literacy and poor decision-making. VMPFC decline can also cause a halo effect, which means that if you see an advertisement, you just want to focus on the shiny and appealing information, and then your brain filters out the red flags or negative information. Community education programs. Why do we need them? They help senior citizens spot and avoid cyber fraud, and they foster ways of thinking about personal information. Previously, I mentioned the genealogical websites where senior citizens would put out personal information such as birth dates and relationships and maybe previous addresses and all that stuff into these websites, and they didn't realize that that personal information could be exploited. And so within the curriculum that I developed in the quiz, I kind of get them thinking about what is personal information, and is it just outside of your social security number or your bank account number? It can also be your current address or your previous address. And it can help develop concrete skills to prevent and mitigate identity theft. Concrete skills such as being able to put out a fraud alert on your credit, setting up online banking in order to better monitor banking online. And these should be tailored to both generational and cultural learning preferences. So maybe rate of speech or the style of instruction, having a lecturer style as opposed to small group instruction. And in-person classes can help develop a sense of community and address the loneliness. Of course, that's not feasible right now with COVID, but after COVID, when we have more in-person classes, those can help address loneliness and develop a sense of community. How do senior citizens prefer to learn? Well, they like having a lecture style with a person in the front of a class giving the information. They like that teacher to be an authoritative teacher. So they want somebody who knows their stuff, and they want that person to speak in a way of, this is what I know, and here, this is why I think you should know it. That you should use a microphone for accessibility purposes. With senior citizens, you're dealing with most likely hearing loss, vision loss, and also mobility issues. So you want to think in terms of accessibility. And graphics and video should supplement the text, not replace it. So you can see on this slide, I have little graphics next to the words. The graphics are not replacing the text, they are supplementing it. The curriculum packet. So what's in this crazy curriculum packet that I developed? Well, I have a lesson plan for about an hour-long class. It includes a 30-minute PowerPoint that goes over the most common fraud types and how to avoid them, and also the core skills that should be developed that are most likely to decrease the probability of fraud victimization. I also developed a 10-question quiz to be conducted at the beginning of the class to get everybody's brains going and see and challenge some preconceived notions. An example of a preconceived notion is that some elderly individuals think that if they don't go online, then their information is not at risk online. And so if they just avoid computers completely, they're perfectly safe. And that's of course not true, because their social security number could be out there. If they don't have online banking set up, they won't know as fast if bank fraud is happening, and so on and so forth. I also include a quick reference handout that individuals can take home and put right next to their computer, and it has the most common fraud types and how to spot them and how to respond to them, mostly by annoying them. And it also has how to report fraud victimization and what you need to, the steps you need to take immediately after, such as changing your bank card numbers and filing police reports and such. It also includes a step-by-step skills handout, and that handout includes the single way to do stuff. Like, step 1, you are going to go to this website, click on this button, input this data, and then that's how you can set up a fraud alert on your credit, or how to submit a complaint to the FTC or the Internet Crimes Complaint Center. I have all of that in a step-by-step skills handout. And then I also include a framework for curriculum updates to make the curriculum packet more adaptable, and so it has a longer lifespan. The framework for updates includes drawing from trusted information and sources such as AARP, the FBI's Internet Crimes Complaint Center, the FTC, and drawing from, of course, NIST's recommendations, and then analyzing cybercrime trends by both frequency and impact in order to determine the cybercrime trends that should be addressed in the lesson. And then also being mindful of cultural differences. So maybe if you present this information on the East Coast, you would have a different attitude towards the information than maybe doing it in rural Alaska, where you want to have it much slower, and you're very, very mindful of the cultural experiences of people there. And then making sure that the materials are presented in an accessible format. So that means having large print sans serif font and having hearing assistive devices available, and just making sure of that. So what are the national level resources? As I mentioned, we have AARP, which includes the Fraud Watch Network helpline, where somebody can call in and report a scam, but they can also receive emotional support from AARP if they have been a victim of a scam. And then there's the Internet Crimes Complaint Center, which is part of the FBI, and they have a complaint form available online, and they cover internet crime reporting in the United States. And then there's also the Federal Trade Commission, which has a complaint assistant available and for scam reporting, and they also run identitytheft.gov, which is a one-stop shop for identity theft resources. Community resource development. The recommendation is having a senior fraud cybercrime helpline, such as the one from AARP. This provides support through resources and just providing a listening ear from a peer. It reduces victimization because it reduces the feelings of shame, loneliness, and depression. At the local and state government level, the local police often lack the resources to conduct cyber fraud investigations. And so the reporting structure should at least include the Internet Crimes Complaint Center. The Internet Crimes Complaint Center may not be able to fully investigate these frauds, but at least they need that data for at least statistical purposes, so they're able to spot trends and put out public service announcements that are relevant. In healthcare, looking at fraud victimization from a healthcare issue, it can be a large indication of an individual's cognitive decline, and sometimes adult protective services does need to get involved. It can also cause social withdrawal and depression. And the APS involvement is a difficult call because it can lead to an individual's loss of independence, but we're looking at what this individual needs in order to stay safe and healthy, and that should guide the decision-making process. So there's a fancy transnational elder fraud strike force that was established in June of 2019. It is part of the 2017 Elder Abuse and Prosecution Act. It is a cooperation between the Department of Justice, the FBI's Internet Crimes Complaint Center, the United States Postal Service Inspection Service, and other government agencies in the United States. They have two main goals. The first one is to identify and disrupt elder fraud related activities. And the second one is to conduct elder fraud research events for older Americans, industry groups, and state and local government officials. So one of the main things there is that they develop public service announcements for fraud types that target senior citizens, such as romance fraud or the tech support scams. And so they're both gathering more information on how the elderly are being targeted and then putting out information and public education events and PSAs in order to address that. Breaking the fraud revictimization cycle requires a community effort. It requires community care, and that includes community education programs. It includes having groups and activities to combat loneliness, such as having a senior center available, or maybe just a Zoom group of local senior citizens who want to work on their knitting, and having a clear government and law enforcement reporting structures so that these crimes don't just get lost or underreported, having a good track of what is happening, and then having mental health resources available helps break the fraud revictimization cycle and victimization cycle. Further resources available are available on my GitHub, my Twitter, and I haven't put it up yet on my website, but I have the full paper that I wrote, the PowerPoint, and the curriculum packet only available on my GitHub. And there we go. Thank you so much.
All right, that was awesome. I really enjoyed that. I actually, growing up, I was a caretaker for my great aunt and great uncle, and so I watched the stages of kind of cognitive decline and like how that affected them, you know. But at that time, that was like 15 years ago or 12 years ago, and they didn't have smartphones. They didn't have an account to log into. It was a house phone that someone would have to call, which they never got through my mom, so they never had to deal with any of that. But I can imagine how big of an issue that is today, especially like you just described. Like, and we do have a couple of questions for you.
Mhm.
So the first one I have is the cognitive decline related to a particular mental condition, or is it atypical aging, or is it a typical aging like hearing decline?
So cognitive decline does typically happen with aging, and the VMPFC, that decision-making center of your brain, is that first part of the brain to decline. But there's no like set scale of when it happens. Like with a child, they develop at kind of the same-ish rate for a child, but there's no decline like same scale for everybody, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Eh,
it's harder to be like, well, at this age, you should have these resources pulled from you.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, that'd be tricky as family members when, because you feel like you have to make that decision for them potentially at some point. And
Yeah,
like,
like with teenagers, we're like, okay, at 16, we can give you a driver's license, but taking that away is much harder.
agreed, absolutely. We have another question from our audience for, has anyone researched if, oh, I forgot to do this, gosh dang it. Has anyone researched if seniors exploited by such fraud has correlation to eventual dementia? They just read an article where financial issues in folks eventually with eventual dementia happened years before diagnosis.
So dementia is kind of a broad area. Like it can be kind of seen as a cognitive decline, and then Alzheimer's is a different thing. But it is an indication of cognitive decline, which is probably the start of the slip into dementia.
Okay, we might have one more question coming here. I see someone typing.
Okay.
Also, people loved your cat.
He's like, I'm going to present.
So in here, let me check our social media accounts, see if anybody else is on here. So here's your next question. So senior family members tend to ignore, shoo off other family members who try to present this information. Is there a motion to create these classes / group instructions? Or
So one of the recommendations I have in my paper is to have this as part of is it SAGE? There's usually an offshoot of universities that teaches free or very cheap classes to senior citizens. And so submitting that as one of the outreach classes can help. And then for trying to present this information and develop buy-in initially for family members, what I recommended to some of my friends is having them go to Have I Been Pwned, to get them to take it seriously, to be like, your information is out there. It is vulnerable. This is why you need to listen to this information. And then it's not being like, oh, I'm able to obtain all this information about you online, and they'll be like, oh, you're a hacker. But being like, other people who are not me have this information.
Yep. They also added on to that question of, or just community senior centers in general.
Yeah, going through community senior centers, and also the outreach program. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I want to say it's SAGE, but it sounds wrong. I don't know. But yeah, doing it through any sort of, if there's community schools in your community, that could be a good opportunity for it, or having senior centers presenting it there, or at say nursing homes. You could go into a nursing home, because a lot of people there are able to have their own devices, and so having them use their devices safely is very important.
Then we have another question for you. Do you find that seniors have trouble adapting to technologies such as multi-factor authentication when checking their online accounts, given the extra steps for its usage?
So the internet changes so frequently, and that's a point of frustration for senior citizens. They're like, I just learned the last thing, and now there are all these new recommendations that contradict what I've already learned. It's very frustrating. So having a set list of instructions that is easy to follow, such as like bullet point 1, click on this button. This is what the button looks like. And then bullet point 2, once it leads you to here, fill in this box with this information. But having those lists available is quite helpful. And then explaining what is going to happen, why they need it, and going through and helping set that up for them can help. But yeah, it is a point of frustration, the rapidly changing environment of the internets.
It does change quickly. All right, I think that's all the questions we have for you at the moment. I don't see anything else coming in or anyone else typing. So again, I'd like to thank you for coming and speaking with us. And I really enjoyed this topic in particular, and I don't think it gets talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you
so much for having me.
No problem.
It's a pleasure.